Hello and welcome back to part 5 of our TM Soup to Nuts video series. In today's episode, we're following on from the previous episode where we performed the planning of freight units to freight orders in the transportation cockpit, which resulted in us creating saving freight orders. Today's episode will be about the execution part, so the follow-on from that planning, where we are going to be assigning this particular freight order to a carrier. We'll be looking at the status tracking capabilities that exist to help a planner stay on top of where he's at within his work. We'll be looking at the event statuses that can be updated in the freight order for you to understand from an execution point of view where that freight order is at. And of course, we will be touching on the all-important integration points that exist with the other modules that are available in SAP, namely the logistics execution part of the house, the ability to integrate, incorporate the delivery management with your freight orders, the ability to pick, pack the deliveries, hence the integration with the warehouse, and also, quite importantly, as we will see, the ability to track handling units within the freight units that we had previously planned. So we can drill down one level deeper from where we were before. If you recall, in the sales orders, we had a freight unit created for a sales order. Well, now we are going to be able to drill down a little bit more into the details to really understand that on a particular pallet, we have a certain number of boxes or items on that pallet, and be able to then also assign a handling unit to that pallet so that you can follow, you can track your shipment at a level below the freight order or the freight unit. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it and see how that happens. Okay, so we are back in the cockpit, pretty much where we left it off in the last episode, in that we have in the top left pane all of the freight units that we had to plan and which we have now successfully planned, as we can see by the check mark. And on the right hand side, we have the resulting planned freight orders that have a varying degree of capacity utilization. And for today's episode, for the purposes of execution, tracking and integration to the logistics part of the house, we will be using this last freight order to follow this process through. So let's have a look at that particular freight order. Again, I'm going to click on the icon to pull up the hierarchy of it. It's purposefully a simple freight order in that there are only 2 customer drop-offs. So we are again loading the freight order, the truck, at our main shipping point, SP1710, to the south of San Francisco, and we are going to be doing a first drop to our customer that is in Fairfield, and we will do the last drop to our second customer in Vacaville. So we can see that we've got 2 freight units finishing with the numbers 59 and 60, and each one of these freight units is linked to a sales order, and each sales order has a couple of sales order items in there. So before I leave the cockpit, one of the things that we could do if we wanted to in the cockpit is to assign the carrier. So again, in the cockpit, in the right hand pane, you can see that you've got this search help for carrier. So you could already, in the cockpit, before you leave it, assign a carrier to it. So that will depend on your workflow, depending on your preference, whether you want to assign these carriers in the transportation cockpit, or would you rather plan all of your freight orders and then go on to freight order list and then go through the freight orders one by one to kind of decide which carrier you think you will contact to carry out the execution of that particular freight order. So for the purpose of illustrating the freight order list, we are going to do it there and not in the transportation cockpit. But again, just know that you would have the possibility of doing this right here in the cockpit. I'm going to leave the cockpit. All right, so again, the idea here is to also view some of the apps that are available to you to carry out your workflow. And by all means, do not forget to look at the scope item documentation that will also have all of these steps clearly documented in there for you. So the first app we're going to look at is this one here called Manage Freight Orders. and I have set this app to have a specific layout. It's also already got some selection parameters pre-filled, such as, for example, the freight order type, because in this particular scenario I want to only look at the internal freight orders that have been planned within S/4HANA Cloud. Now, the freight order that I'm interested in, if you recall, is this one here, which is the one that finishes with 58. And the first thing that we of course notice here, as we had seen in Transportation Cockpit, is that it does not have a carrier assigned to it yet. Also, what we can do here is we can restrict those freight orders that have yet not been started to kind of further reduce the my work list, if you like. Okay, so these are all freight orders that have not yet been started and that I would potentially need to plan. This is the order that I'm interested in, so I'm going to select it to go into it, and while I'm in the order I'm going to click on edit so that the fields become open for input. Some of the key information that you want to enter, of course, are the carrier, and you can use the search help to find the carrier that corresponds to your particular choice, or as I will do in my case, I know the business partner number, so I'm just going to enter it and I'm going to select my carrier, which at this point should be understood to be my preferred carrier, in the sense that I may or may not have already had discussions with my carrier. And again, this will depend on your workflow. So it could be that you've had a discussion with your carrier offline, he's agreed that he's going to do this for you, or potentially you haven't had that discussion yet, but you are putting that carrier name in there to highlight the fact that this is your preferred carrier, and you will then communicate to him and record his confirmation in the system subsequently. The other information that is of primordial importance are, of course, the organizational level information, and we are going to be working in Purchasing Organization 1710 and also the Purchasing Group 005, which is also a key piece of information. Now you can see that based on the purchasing organization, the system has automatically determined the company code, and this organizational information as well as the carrier are of course needed in order to be able to carry out the charge calculation in this particular freight order. If you're missing one or the other, the charge calculation is not going to work. So if we go into the business partner tab, here we can see that the shipper has been determined. The shipper is you. And if you recall, in one of the very first steps that we did when we set up TM in our S/4HANA Cloud environment was to assign a business partner to the company code. So we assigned the purchasing organization in the freight order, which helped us to determine the corresponding company code, and then from the company code the system was able to determine the business partner, which corresponds to the shipper, which is you. We've also entered the carrier, and based on the partner roles from that carrier role, the system was also then able to understand the invoicing party. If we look at the items, we can see that we have on our vehicle 2 freight units loaded, and the reason why I'm attracting your attention to this particular part of the screen at this point is so that once we have done the integration with handling unit management, we can see additional information being added there as well. What we can also do at this point is to calculate the charges. As I said, we've indicated the carrier, we've indicated the purchasing organization structural level, so that should be sufficient for the system to be able to determine a corresponding freight agreement. And in the freight agreement, we will find the various charges that are to be used to calculate the cost of transporting these goods from our shipping point to our customer locations. Now, we're not going to go into great detail in the charge part of the freight order in this episode, as we will use this in the next episode, which will deal with the financial part, the settlement part of the process. However, what we can indicate here is that we have different charges that have been determined based on the freight agreement that is associated to my carrier in this particular purchasing organization, and we can see that various rates have been determined pertaining to basic kilo transportation rates. We have an insurance premium that has been determined. We also have loading charges that have been determined, handling charges, as well as a absolute surcharge and a freight flat rate. Of importance also to notice at this point is that some charges appear multiple times and some charges appear only once. Again, as we will see in a next episode when we deal with the charge calculation and the freight settlement, charges can be set at different levels, i.e. at the product level, at the stage level, or at the freight order level. So these charges are multiplied, such as loading charges, for example. They are charges that are applied in this particular case at the product level. We also have charges that are added to the freight order only once, and these are in this case charges that are set at the freight order level, at the route level if you want to get technical about it. And then lastly, before we go, we'll go off to the document flow. And again, here we have the complete visibility. We can see that this freight order is assigned to these two sales orders which generated these two freight units. And we'll see that as the process unfolds, we'll get the delivery numbers also then being appended onto this particular document flow. All right, so that has kind of wrapped up some of the information that is of interest in the freight order. Now, before we go, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the subcontracting tab, and we are going to set the freight order as being sent to carrier to reflect the fact that I have been discussing this freight order with my carrier. We've communicated on this, and you can see that because I chose the option to send this to the carrier, the subcontracting status has also now been updated to sent. So this is also a good way, if you have a lot of freight orders, to remember, did I discuss this freight order with my carrier or not? And obviously, if you have the status of sent, then it should reflect the fact that this information has been communicated to your carrier either via email, fax, telephone, whatever means of your choosing. So your carrier will obviously look at this freight order. He might assess whether he's got the fleet available and the capacity available to carry out the freight order that you've requested of him to do. And what you can then do in the system is update that subcontracting status by choosing the option to set to confirm by carrier to reflect the fact that your carrier has come back to you to say, all good, I will execute this freight order based on what you've indicated to me in terms of cargo, weight, distance, destination, and of course as well cost. So we're going to say set to confirm by carrier, and the confirmation status should then also be updated to, as you can see here, to being confirmed. So I can save my freight order now, and we've saved it. We can see that certain things have happened. The cost distribution has been done and the charge calculation has been done. The cost distribution we will tackle in the next episode in more detail, but essentially what this means is that the system has taken the charges, the freight charges of this freight order, and based on the weight, the gross weight of the items, distributed those charges to the sales order items. So to recap, at this point, we've got our freight order, we have assigned it to a carrier, the carrier has confirmed that he is going to do the job. So the next step in this process is to create the deliveries, because of course we also need the warehouse to do a certain number of activities. They need to go and bring the goods from the racking, from the warehouse, from storage location to a dispatching area that will then be ready to be loaded onto the truck. So to create the deliveries, you've got a couple of options. The first one is that you can create deliveries from freight orders using this app here, and this, if in effect, is going to be a batch job which you can schedule to run at predetermined times. And of course, if you have a well pat down process where, for example, you want to create deliveries every day at 4 p.m. ready for the next day's work, then obviously you can schedule that job to run every day at 4 p.m. as an example. You could also run it once off for a number of freight orders. So this is one way of doing it, but again, bearing in mind that the idea behind it is that there is a batch job that is going to be running. The other way that you can do it is, again, by going back to our Manage Freight Orders app. And I'm again just going to go and pick the ones that have not yet started. We've got our order here, which is 66058, which is the order that we have been working on. And you can see here that when you select this freight order, we have the Create Deliveries menu that becomes active. And for each freight order that you pick, you can see that you also have the option here of creating the deliveries for all of the freight orders that you have selected. So I'm going to select my freight order here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to say Create Deliveries. And actually, before we go, I'll just quickly also show you that you can trigger this delivery creation right from within the freight order. Again, if we were in edit mode, I could simply click on Create Deliveries and that would have the same effect. So again, I'm just going back here. I've selected my freight order. I'm going to say Create Deliveries. Delivery creation triggered for one freight order. I'm just going to click Go to refresh. And we can see here that the thermometer-like delivery creation progress has now updated to say 100% of the deliveries that needed to be created have been created. And what we can do is, again, if we go into the freight order and look at the document flow, so we go back to the document flow and we should now have had an update, as we can see here, and we can see that we have two deliveries that have been created. This delivery 355, 356, corresponding to the two sales orders that we have, so 916 and 917. So for each sales order, the system has created one outbound delivery. Now you can of course imagine that from a warehouse point of view, now we have the pick lists that have been printed, they've gone out, the warehouse is working to bring the goods from, as I said, from the racks, from the storage locations to a dispatching preparation area. So that will be the next part of the process that we are going to look at. All right, so now before we go and look at the delivery side of the house, let's quickly do a detour in the app track sales order, and let's look at the sales order 916, which is one of those two sales orders that was included in my freight order. And you'll see that now in the document flow that you have in the track sales order app, you have the full visibility of the freight unit as well as the freight order. So that's a really good thing. Also, we can see that we have a shipping issue, and the issue is that my delivery has not yet been picked. So let's get to it and let's get that delivery picked and packed. So for that, we're going to go to another app again in the deliveries part of the house, and for that we'll use the app Manage Outbound Deliveries. Again, I've got a certain number of settings that are specific to me. I'll also then further narrow it down to say, well, show me what has been created today. And we have just the two deliveries that we have created. Obviously, from this list, you can delve into the details of each of these two deliveries. And you could, not here, you could via related apps go to the Change Outbound Delivery app, because we need to look at the packing first, and this can only be done in the Change Outbound Delivery app. The other way that you could do it would be, again, right from this particular menu, where you could click on the delivery number, and if you didn't have the link taking you to the change outbound delivery screen, you could go to more links and simply add it in there if you wanted to. Say OK. So I'm just going to go to my first delivery, 356. So we have our two items. We've got a widget and groovy widget, and what we're going to do is we're going to pack these two items. And what we will do here is that we are going to pack both of them onto a pallet. So let me search for a pallet real quick, and we'll take the PM pallet. We'll say OK. There we go. Pack both of these items. And we can see that we have a handling unit number that has been issued. So my pallet with my widgets on there now have been assigned to a handling unit number. And I'm going to just say save. My delivery has been saved, and we're back into this list here. What I'm going to do with the second one is going to be a little bit different, in that I'm going to pack the two items each on their own pallet, and again, for the purposes of seeing what that means in the freight order. So again, I'm going to use that pallet material number, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the first item, I'm going to pack it, and then I'm going to again use the same pallet to pack my second item. So now this delivery is going to be associated with two handling units. Again, I save that and I exit. And what I could do before I leave the warehouse environment is quickly go into each one of these deliveries and confirm the picking. But I will not post the goods issue just yet, because this is something that we will do once the truck has really departed our locations. Okay, so now we have, from a picking status, the two deliveries that have been completely processed. So the warehouse has completed their activities. They have picked, they have packed the items. They are now sitting in the dispatching area. We're just going to wait for the truck to arrive so that we can proceed with the actual loading of the truck, and then we'll actually post the goods issue on those outbound deliveries. Again, before we go back to the transport operations, let's quickly go into track sales order for that same sales document that we had before, 916, and see what the status, fulfillment status is. So we no longer have the picking issue signaled on the outbound delivery, because obviously we have done it and everything is okay, in the sense that the shipping is planned on the 10th and at the moment it's the 9th. So at this point we have no issues, everything is okay, and the system is also here telling me that the shipping is due in the next 1 day. Perfect. Let's go back to transportation. So as I said, now we're heading over back to transportation, and to do the execution monitoring, we will go to this app called Monitor Execution of Freight Orders. So again, we have a freight order list which has a certain number of selection criteria that you can leverage to tailor your workflow to the amount of information that you are going to see. For instance, here I can see that I've got different freight orders with varying statuses, but what I'm really interested in are those statuses that are only not yet started. So I'm just going to say I want to see the ones that are not yet started. I also want to see those freight orders that have a carrier that is assigned. So I'm just going to go to define conditions, and I'm going to say is not empty for the carrier, because obviously I just want to see those freight orders that have a carrier indicated. And we land on that one order, which is the one that we have been working with in this particular episode. So again, we go into the order, and the first thing that we really want to look at is the items part of the information. So as you can see, before we only had the freight units and then the two products, but we can now also see the handling unit management information that has been added. So we have that additional level of detail of information that clearly tells me that this product is sitting on this pallet that is part of that freight unit. And if you recall, we had one delivery where we put the two items on the one pallet, and in the other delivery we packed each item on its own individual pallet. And again, you can see this information clearly highlighted in the item hierarchy. Okay, so let's go back to the general data, and we'll flip the order to edit. Now, one other important piece of information that you would probably want to enter, and it's not that there is any constraint in terms of processing, but it's probably more from a compliance point of view. And certainly in countries such as Australia, we have something that is called the chain of responsibility, which means that you as a shipper also have a responsibility in making sure that the assets that are presented at your premises to carry the goods that you want to transport to your customers have also been checked and are in good, acceptable working order. Which means that probably you as a shipper also have a responsibility to checking, making sure that the vehicle has had the necessary recent mechanical roadworthiness checks. So it's always good for you to record exactly what truck did what transport, so that if anything should happen, you have that information of saying, oh yes, it was truck Rego ABC123 that performed this particular transport. So the information that we can enter here is going to be the country of registration. So we'll put US, and the Rego of this truck is going to be SAP001, just to be a little bit creative. And again, I'm going to quickly just save that piece of information. Now, this is some information that obviously the carrier could have given you ahead of the transport actually being executed, or it could be a piece of information that you would have knowledge of once the truck actually showed up at your premises. So now what we're going to do is we are going to, just for the sake of looking at the statuses and how they change, going to focus on the stages. Now, you can see that here we have the two stages of our freight order. So we're going from our shipping point to the first customer location, and then we are going to the second customer location. And for each one of these stages at the source location and destination locations, you have a certain number of statuses that are at your disposal that you can check and activate to reflect the progress of transportation. And not all of these statuses are mandatory, so we'll go through those in just a moment. However, before you are able to enter any one of these statuses, there is one execution status that we need to set at the freight order level, and that is set ready for transport execution. If you do not set that, you'll get an error message when you try to update the execution statuses at the stage level. So for the freight order, we're going to say set ready for transport execution. And you can see that from an execution status, it has now also been updated to ready for transport execution. All right, so we can now update the freight order stages at the source location first with the various execution tracking statuses that might pertain to that source location in that stage. And you can see that we have the ability to set the truck to arrived, to checked in, to checked out, and to departed. You do not have to set all of these statuses. And by that I mean that it could be that the information is readily available, it is important for you to have that information, and you could status by status say, yes, the truck has arrived. Then once he's done the checking in procedure, you could say it has checked in. Once it's got loaded, did all the paperwork, you could then say the truck was checked out, and then you could set it to departed to reflect the fact that the vehicle has physically left your shipping point. What you should also know is that out of all of these statuses, one status in particular that is super important is this one here, which is called set to checked out. This status is a prerequisite to being able to post the cost, to post the accrual for that particular freight order. If you don't set the status to checked out, then you will not be able to execute the ensuing financial processes. I'm just going to highlight exactly what that means. I'm just going to say save, and we're going to again get out to go back to the main Fiori Launchpad. Now watch this tile here, monitor accrual posting. I'm just going to refresh it, and we can see that for confirmation is still at this point showing up as 0. And we'll see that as we change the statuses on the freight order, once we get to checked out, we have then the ability to perform the accrual postings. I'm just going to go back to monitor execution of my freight orders. I know that this is my freight order. Again, I click on edit. I go down to the stage, and what we're going to do, what I'm going to show you here is also another phenomenon, in the sense that there is a propagation phenomenon that will happen. And that means that if you were to say, well, I'm not going to indicate that the truck has arrived, I'm just going to indicate that it has been checked in, a propagation will happen to say, well, if this status has been set, it means that this has happened, and the system will automatically propagate the check or the activation of this status down to arrived. So by simply saying that the freight order has been checked in, it'll also then automatically set it to arrived. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm just going to say that the truck has been checked in to reflect the fact that he arrived and he was checked in. So the logistical execution status has now been updated to checked in. And if we look at the execution tab of the freight order, we will see that 2 statuses have been added. We have the check-in and arrival at destination, because as you can see, this propagation phenomenon happened. And you can also see that both have been activated at the same time, again, because of that propagation phenomenon. So I'm going to save the freight order. Again, we're going to go back to the Fiori Launchpad. I'm going to click on refreshing the accrual postings tile, and you can still see that the system is showing this for confirmation indicator as 0, i.e. there are still no freight orders that are available to me to perform the accrual posting on. Again, I go back to my freight order execution app, go into my freight order, again click on edit. I'm going to pick my stage, and I'm going to say that the truck has now been checked out. So this is the key status, as I said, that will enable me to perform the accrual posting. We can see the logistical execution status has now also been updated to checked out. My freight order is in execution, and if we go to the execution tab, we can see that the loading end status has been appended to my freight order automatically because I indicated that it had been checked out. So again, I'm going to save this. I'm going to go back to the Fiori Launchpad, and if I update my tile now, we can see that now we have for confirmation the freight order for which we just updated the status to checked out as available for confirmation. So again, just to look at the number of the freight order, I'm going to go into the accruals app, and you can see that the order that we had 5/8 is now available to me to post the accrual on, and this will be the starting point to really kick off the financial process, the financial part of this process, i.e. copying the charges to the TM billing document, or at least it will make the charges available to my TM billing document once the delivery has been goods issued. But also once I confirm this posting, it'll then create the service entry sheet purchase order for me able to receive the invoice from my carrier and resolve the financial process with my carrier as well. So I'm just going to go back to my freight order. Again, we go to the execution. I'm going to go on edit. And what I will do now is I'm going to reflect the fact that my truck has departed. So the truck has physically left the premises, and we can see that the logistical execution status is reflecting as departed. So I'm going to save. And if you recall, what we also need to do now is simply on the 2 outbound deliveries is to actually post a goods issue, because the truck has departed and we have to reflect the fact that the goods issue has happened. My stocks have gone down because the stock has physically been put onto the truck and it has left my warehouse. So once again, we go back to putting on our warehouse inventory management hat on. We go back to managing outbound deliveries. We can, from a status point of view, want to look at the ones that are ready to post the goods issue. Well, still quite a few there. So again, we'll resort to putting the date on which the delivery was created. And we have our 2 deliveries. We select both of them. We're going to say post the goods issue. Agree with the goods issue date. And my 2 goods issues have now been recorded in the system. Before we finish off here on the freight order, one more thing we are going to do is quickly go back into our freight order, which is this one. And of course, from an event tracking point of view, you absolutely have the possibility to, at a source or destination level, continue to record the events on that freight order, meaning that once the carrier tells you, oh, I have arrived at the first stop and I've again departed, you could, if you wanted to, set those statuses there as well. But with regards to the execution status of the freight order, what we are really interested in is also mostly the last status at the last destination, because we want to make sure that it is understood that this freight order is done and dusted, it has been fully executed. And for that, what we would do is we would simply go to the destination location of the last stage, and here we would say that the truck departed that location, meaning that it had arrived, it got checked in, it got checked out, and then it left again. So by saying that the truck has departed, we can see here the execution has now been updated to executed. This freight order is done and dusted. And if we go and look at the statuses in the execution tab of the freight order, we also have all of that information. So we can see everything that happened at my shipping point, and by simply selecting that departed event at the destination location of the last stage, and by this propagation phenomenon, we can see that all of the statuses that should have happened at the other intermediate and final destinations have been automatically updated here as well. So we can save, and there we go. So this really was the to highlight the capabilities that exist to track the execution of your freight orders. as well as the integration to the delivery management. And in particular, what we wanted to highlight was the integration to the handling unit management, which allows you to have an additional level of detail to track the cargo that is being transported on the freight orders that you have contracted to your carriers. So there you go. That was in-system execution monitoring capabilities offered by Basic Transportation Management in SAP S/4HANA Cloud 2108. I hope that this has given you insights into the status tracking capabilities that do exist that allow you to report back to the freight order so that you can stay on top of understanding what the progress is with regards to a particular shipment. I hope it has also provided you with some insights into the capabilities that exist as far as integration exists with the other logistics execution modules, and again, in particular with the delivery management and the unit handling management. So until next time, when we will touch on the financial part of the process, where we will be looking at the settlement of the freight charges to billing documents, should you desire to also invoice your customers for the actual freight charges incurred for a particular transport, as well as the settlement with your carriers. And we'll look at the process that exists there to be able to either perform a self-billing with your carriers or wait for them to send you an invoice and pay on invoice. So until next time, stay safe. See you soon.